very recently published a call for proposals, or quotes, for the development of the port and rail to Boegoebaai. And I mean, it doesn't get more real than that. So very, 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 very happy to have you on the panel. And last but not least, almost the man of the hour. I was told not to say too much about it, but you do know that we are waiting for the DTIC's commercialization strategy for a while now. And rumor has it that we may be some of the first to know, not in this session, but maybe a bit later. So we are going to ask Kishan Pillay from the DTIC a lot of questions about what they are planning. But we would like to start off with the two ports. So Hendrik and Kasifa, if you could share your experience. I'm going to start with Kasifa, her experience about how did this whole journey start? What do you see as the bottlenecks? And what can we do, or what do you think we should address? And then I'm going to hand over to Hendrik. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I will try to be brief because this is quite a big panel, and I'll be here for the day as well as tomorrow, so engage with me afterwards. So that's just, I'm leaving that there. So where did this start? I think that it's the change and shifts in policy towards climate change. And a very real kickstarter for us was when KfW issued the RFI for financing for green hydrogen projects in South Africa. That opened the floodgates for project developers approaching us. And, you know, the Freeport and the special economic zone out of the port of Saldanha was never envisaged. I mean, green hydrogen wasn't on the agenda, and this was, you know, was conceptualized in 2010. So that really opened the floodgates of queries. And the astonishing thing happened is that the private sector started approaching us with interest because they were doing their own studies. There were many international institutions and in other countries that had commissioned research, and Saldanha was filtered through, you know, as one of the potential sites. So that's where it started, and where we are now is that we have a project pipeline, I would say, of over in excess of 15 different project developers in the green hydrogen value chain. And I showcased some of the top 4, I would say. So the Sasol ArcelorMittal project, certainly, that announcement's been made. There's another project, and Minister De Lille mentioned it, that's also been registered with ISA, is Atlanthea, which is also wants to go into green ammonia. Kern Energy, which already has a pilot proof of concept project out in Vredendal, and they're looking also at industry and mobility. And then there's a smaller project, which is a pilot project for mobility, which is RRS Investments. So where we are is our investors want land, and they want clarity from the policy environment of what South Africa can offer, and what is the plans and the mechanisms to advance the sector. And one of the key aspects, because it's a very nuanced market, so there's local offtake potential, but there is the possibility of export, but in particular for Saldanha, it is in marine bunker fuels, because you have a port that already accommodates 77% of bulk carriers out of there. So it's a question, and all of these shipping companies are decarbonizing their vessel fleet. So hand in hand then with the Transnet National Ports Authority, we've been on a journey to understand what is the port infrastructure and what is that interface when the land meets the sea between the free port and the port. So as to challenges, I think that there's so much complexity in what we're doing and trying to do together, and also navigating our legal instruments. So we have the Special Economic Zone Act, which gives us our mandate and sets clear responsibilities, and the Ports Authority has the Ports Act. And how do we merge these two now in an innovative alliance for the state's interests? I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. To Hendrik, thanks.
Thank you very much. Boegoebaai started, actually, to be frank, in the 1860s, when the original colonialists started exporting copper from there, because it's a natural deport. Where are we today? That is one of the transitions, and I must compliment Max and his team, Portia, Pepe, and then needless to say, Minister Praveen. I think on the advent of the global energy revolution towards a JET-P, the actual need was then established to say, but in co-location to the best energy resource in the world that overlaps solar and then wind, combined with coastal access, the logistics to enable it became a pertinent matter. And you will know that volume consolidation is critical in this, certification is critical in this process. And therefore Boegoebaai just came up to the fore to say, green port, that is greenfield, custom selected to have the best provision to be able to have certified product. Now, that combination makes for a competitive advantage that is globally not echoed yet. Because with this reference, we can then produce green certified hydrogen for world export market that is going to be highly competitive due to the RE component. The renewable energy component is 60% of your input cost. And if you then utilize your desalination, which is in close vicinity, come on, that's an easy calculation. So what do we have in addition to that? Is we're looking at a port which we're also redefining, not a decarbonized port, not a confined port, not a polluted port. We are looking at a greenfield, green port establishment. We are looking at a SEZ. If you look at the essence of green hydrogen and ammonia, the principle that we foresee here is that we have to specialize ourselves, and that needs size. So we are looking at a 30,000 hectare special economic zone, and their infrastructure and logistics will set us apart, combined with the efficiency of the green port. Now this is why Boegoeberg is then the 10th port in South Africa, and then furthermore also, as you can see from the RFQ, it is a BOT model. But now here I must put the rider. The rider there is there's an RFQ process currently out there, closing on the 5th of December. Those that haven't submitted, make sure you submit, come on. Coming to that side, as ladies and gentlemen, that 10th port location is out in the mist still, if I may utilize that, sorry, because we have to look at South Africa as the best location for the most cost-efficient and logistic-efficient port. So Proviso is, and that's the rider that I have to issue. So the announcement that we'll be making, let's say the 1st of March, will be the pertinent one, and that will be the final destination of the 10th port in South Africa at that. But in the meantime, we are going everything ahead with the special economic zone. Challenges, let's quickly discuss that. I think the regulatory framework in South Africa, current fiscal constraint makes big projects like this difficult. And we need to combine the regulatory platform of special economic zone, like Kashifa compliments, kudos on that one, is bringing the SEZ Act together, which is currently under review by the DTIC, the Ports Authority Act in the combinations of requirements on that, and the overlay. Why are those two important? We need to compete against a global world where we have integrated port and special economic zone, i.e. Port of Rotterdam. So if we cannot align those two interventions, we've already got concern. And then it's the uncharted domain currently to define PTX, define green ammonia and hydrogen and that regulatory context, and the interface with the outer and the inner battery limit. So those challenges will redefine port logistics, and ultimately the logistics of ammonia and hydrogen. Is it a good time? Yes, it's a good time for us to redefine that, and we're in an opportune position on that side. Is it a legible one? Yes, because we've got an anchor partner in there, Sasol, which is the biggest producer of hydrogen in the world, although being grey, but 70 years experience, and that helps us to set up a public-private partnership script writing exercise, which can assist us to advance this process. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Hendrik. Now to maybe jump across the border, Marco, if you could be telling us a little bit about the Hyphen project, where you see similarities in the development process and maybe similarities in the challenges. But I do have to tell you, South Africa, as South Africans, do get a bit of a chill in our backsides because we feel like, oh, you are really far ahead. So please tell us how you did it.
So I think the first thing to say is don't be worried about being a little bit behind. We've done some work to try to quantify how much green hydrogen is required. Our project is 6 to 7 gigawatts of generation capacity, some of the best co-located sun and wind in the world. That's to meet net zero by 2050. That's 550 million tons. That's the low end. That's 1,600 of our projects. If you take an average generation capacity around the world, that's 3,000 projects. It's an enormous amount. The concern for us is more around where are you going to find the land resources to be able to implement these projects at a scale and a speed that makes sense. And that's really where I think Namibia has a big role to play, not only for itself, but also in terms of regional integration. So even when our consortium submitted our bid in September of last year, our bid included a pipeline running all the way down from our site, which is 70 kilometers south of Luderitz, 250 kilometers to the border of South Africa, past Boegoebaai, into Sasolburg, into Secunda, into Johannesburg, and into the Cape, because that hydrogen valley, which is 20,000 square kilometers of land completely unoccupied, one landowner, all the government of Namibia, has a hydrogen potential on a very conservative basis from an environmental footprint perspective of around 5 million tons. And currently we're working on the premise of 3 million tons export out the country by vessel, and 2 million tons that potentially could flow into South Africa to assist South Africa on its decarbonization journey. That's still a fraction of what South Africa needs. And each of these projects also produces an enormous amount of electricity that is excess to requirements even when you optimize your technical design. And that excess electricity supply can also assist in regional energy security. And we think that's a major theme for Southern Africa. Namibia currently doesn't have load shedding, even though it is reliant on South Africa for a large amount of its energy supply. But it is a risk for Namibia. And the emergence of the hydrogen industry in South Africa and in Namibia can help to alleviate that in terms of those excess electrons that will be available. So we see regional integration as being critical to the success of Southern Africa, and we are not competitors. We are all brothers and sisters in arms, because our competitor is to scale up as quickly as possible. And to do that, you need to go to the places in the world with the best resources, and that's Namibia and South Africa are two of those countries. So to try to put that into context, if you wanted to take our project and put it in Germany, for every one solar panel we deploy in our site, you need to deploy 3 in Germany. For every one wind turbine, you need to deploy 2. Supply chains are enormously under strain. If you want to offset carbon quickly, you need to go to those geographies in the world that will enable you to offset as quickly as possible. I'm not going to touch on the SEZ elements. I'll leave it for others, but I think Namibia sees it as a very similar way.
Thank you very much. Amen, brother. We are all brothers and sisters, no competition, working together here. So I would like to now go to Mags to just keep it with the development that was mentioned. And I know you can't say too much because the process is still open, but it does signify an enormous level of confidence in the project to do this. So could you perhaps just share with us a little bit the planning, where you think this would be going, and how that would contribute to this provincial collaboration, the Northern Cape, Western Cape provincial collaboration? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and good afternoon to everyone. I think Hendrik has actually given a good kickoff, just to give a sense that there's been a huge amount of collaboration taking place between Transnet as well as provincial government. Over the years, a lot of work has been done by both entities, and I think more specifically, more work by the provincial government, specifically developing the concept into what is possibly a pre-feasibility phase. And I think that gave rise to the location of Boegoebaai, which essentially had developed a port layout that was a response to a number of commodities that the port had to respond to. I think one thing that we need to bear in mind, that in the main, when this project developed some years back, it was really responding to a dry bulk export corridor. So a lot of the facilities that are coming through is addressing that particular need. In more recent terms, of course, the green hydrogen economy has developed. There's a huge amount of demand for the export of green ammonia. So there's a linkage to the work that Sasol is doing port facilities, shipping facilities to be able to export that commodity. So there had to be a lot of rework, and I think thanks to the provincial government, some of that has been factored in. So Transnet has really taken that and moved forward. How do we actually then accelerate that particular project, given the very, very tight and aggressive timelines that we're trying to chase? We want to have a port operational by 2028. Friends and colleagues, that's a difficult task, but I think everyone's up for the task. And we've then developed a mechanism to see how we could then have a two-stage RFP process, or request for proposals, commencing with a request for qualifications, where we start to get a sense of interested parties out in the market, both from a design, construction, as well as funding perspective. Knowing that funding certainly would pose a challenge. It's not just about funding the port, but it's also the rail connectivity back into the hinterland, which comes at a significant cost. And that's really where we are at the moment, trying to test the market response, find potential bidders and partners that would want to take forward, and I think importantly, get technical information to validate and perform some element of due diligence as to whether there are alternate solutions that are more price efficient. And once that RFQ phase is completed, we've assessed it, we then finalize what would be the project scope and develop the phase moving forward into the second stage of the RFP. And that's really where we are. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. I would like to jump first to the provincial level, Joanne. A little bit of your vision. I think what is always exemplary of the Western Cape is that you've identified certain service industries or industries and really went out and developed them. What is the view on the green hydrogen economy for the Western Cape? Where do you see it going? And perhaps also something around this collaboration with the Northern Cape. Thank you.
Thanks. I think our vision is to be a strategic hydrogen partner. I know for some industries we aim to be, and we are, the Cape, like the tech capital of Africa, etc., etc. But I think for hydrogen, we recognize that the partnership is going to be key to the success, because it's not unique to just the Western Cape, much bigger. And I think James on the plenary session spoke a little bit about how in Europe there are integration, there are fairly nearby ports that work together as opposed to compete with each other. Antwerp and Rotterdam is less than 100 kilometers away from each other. There are a whole multitude of ports in the Persian Gulf, and that's about 1,000 kilometers away from each other. And if you look at Swakopmund and Saldanha, it's 1,600 kilometers away from each other. And you basically have ample opportunity in that space. And the space is huge. So, yeah, I know that there are different projections around the size of the market of hydrogen in 2050. But one says it's going to be $12 trillion in 2050. If you look at our economy at the moment in South Africa, it's about $340 billion US. Namibia is a little bit less. But if we are aiming to do 10%, that's significantly bigger than our current entire current economy. The opportunity is huge. And for any particular regional province to think that they themselves can uniquely capture that, it's not possible. We don't have the skills. We need to basically do this together, and the opportunity is actually better realized if we work together. And that's also because you look at customers who want different things. So CMB wants to do ammonia for their ships. Maersk wants methanol. Other shipping lines want other things. And so depending on what the customers want, you allow along the coastline for different kinds of specialization. And that's what's going to happen. Is there may well be overlap, but there will be essentially specializations because of the scope of the opportunities. The second thing is to provide scale. So yes, singularly Namibia is going to be rocking, as is Northern Cape. But if you have 3 ports, essentially all demanding a hell of a lot of renewables, and then the value chains, you are talking about scale that is going to compel the value chain component manufacturers to come there. It also diffuses the risk because essentially you're not beholden to one buyer in one province. You essentially have a market that spreads along the Atlantic coast. So there's redundancy, as well, risk redundancy that's good for one, the investors, but also the buyers from the Atlantic seaboard, or sorry, the southwest SADC region, because the potential obviously goes beyond just Namibia. And I think, certainly from our side, what is really useful, because Namibia has been the pathfinder. They've moved fast, and sometimes when you cooperate, you move at the pace of the fastest. And it's a good little cooperation benchmark that prevents us from being complacent and moving sometimes at a bit of a slower pace than we should. So I really do believe that there's a lot of scope and opportunity and benefits from the cooperation. The opportunity is bigger than one single region. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanne. A very good introduction to the national perspective. If you, Kishan, if you could, I know you can't tell us what's in the commercialization strategy, nudge, nudge, but if you could say your vision for, or the DTIC's vision for the sector. I think when you speak about the $1 trillion, sometimes it's like you go drooly in the mouth. It's just so big. So your vision and next steps. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so I think what's from a DTIC's perspective is, it's good to have all the SEZs on this panel, and what I'm glad to hear is cooperation and complementarity amongst them, because I think we do not want SEZs to necessarily compete, but we want them to complement each other. From a commercialization perspective, I think what has happened is while we were developing the strategy, industry and project developers were moving ahead simultaneously. And what was good about watching that process and the policy development process was that it was almost a instant feedback loop into whether our thinking was on track. And the way we started approaching, looking at locations for where we'd like to locate the hydrogen economy, we assessed it using sort of 6 metrics. The first would be access to renewable resource, the availability of renewable energy development zones, like so how far were the sites from that? Market positioning, are we talking about export? Are we talking about supporting domestic demand? Are we looking at both? Existing infrastructure, what can be tapped in terms of logistics in place? Networks, resources in terms of human capital, where were they located? And then obviously existing industry in certain regions as to be anchor clients to help with project bankability. And then what was interesting coming out of that process was we've identified a few ports. Boegoebaai were identified as because of its renewable energy potential, deep port and existing infrastructure, as a very good greenfield project. Saldanha Bay came out through the analysis, Kucha, as well as the Vaal Triangle as an inland port because it's located very much close to our industrial hub. There's a lot of logistics up there, a lot of human capital, a lot of good infrastructure and engineering capabilities that can be used in developing the green hydrogen sector, but it's also close to our platinum resources, which will be a big advantage for South Africa going forward. So we definitely look at it from a complementary perspective. We've identified the similar ports. We agree that you have to take a national perspective because not one port can do everything. And ultimately, it will be dependent on the type of projects. And project developers know what they're looking for. They know what sort of ports they're looking for to export their project, or do they want to develop domestic markets. They know if they want to locate electrolyzers close to the renewable energy resources and close to demand, or they're willing to toll it from more more rich renewable energy spaces. So the details will be filled in by the project developers itself. Our role was just to ensure that, yes, what the feedback we were getting from industry as you're moving kind of fits in with the way we optimized it after the fact, so that there was a good comfort for us. And then I think what's important going forward is, how do we then unblock as these projects start rolling over? Because there's a lot of things we don't know yet, and that will only become clear once projects start being implemented.
Thank you very much. Now, right back to the local level, Matt. So, as Atlantis SEZ, where do you see yourself in the picture? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, Atlantis is a green tech special economic zone, and I think in the context of this discussion, it is appropriate that we kind of come at the end of this conversation, because we are a green tech component manufacturing SEZ. So for us, the interesting part of this equation is not so much the green hydrogen production, but all the components that will be supplying and supporting that green corridor as it develops. So Atlantis sits just south of Freeport Saldanha and within the city of Cape Town. So we have that proximity, and of course we're on that West Coast corridor. So we're watching the space, and we always talk about things like beneficiation and localization and so forth. The amount of energy that will be required, green energy, renewable energy that will be required to drive this green hydrogen revolution is huge. And we really should be using that as an opportunity to drive local component manufacture, whether it's a solar panel manufacturer, wind turbine manufacturer, we should be driving that. And again, it's not to say that that should just be in Atlantis. I think there's opportunities right up that corridor to drive that, but we really should be driving that. There's all sorts of backwards and forward linkages that that these leading edge projects are gonna create. So from our perspective, we're very much in support of this process, supporting the manufacturing and the components and all the bits and pieces that will be needed to support this new green revolution, if you like. And we're also very mindful of the kinds of skills and the opportunity to create inclusion. This whole West Coast is quite a poor area within the context of South Africa. So, and the skills required in a lot of this green technology space are quite well transferable from the conventional economy. Not all of them, but like welding has been shown to be a consistently important skill in the green economy as much as it is in the conventional economy. So there are also those kinds of opportunities. And as a green tech SEZ, we're very much invested in the whole skills and enterprise development space. So really building the opportunities for extending the regional value chains and being inclusive actually in the way that we go about development. So for us, it's about looking with great interest at what all these leaders in the field are going to be doing. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. We now have an opportunity for questions. If you want to pose a question to any of the panelists, please just put up your hand. If you have posted a question in the app, please repeat it, because I'm app stupid, or my colleague might be able to retrieve the question. But if you have a question, please, a show of hands. No question. Oh, there's. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
My name is Martin van Zyl. I'm in the mining industry, but also in development of projects. Looking at, I hope it's Atlantis that manufactured the engines those years, that center. I know you do wonderful work there, because I've inspected it once upon a time, from pens to engines. But I'm looking at how do they marry a decentralized base, say in Springbok, where there is a facility which is equipped to quite a large extent. I don't know what is the status now, but I think the TWED colleges, as well as the universities, can develop skill for the run-up to the implementation program, which will then lead to permanent employment instead of short-term establishment. The second part is decentralization of industries in the supply side to give life between Atlantis as well as, excuse me, Springbok up to Alexander Bay. I think looking at what is happening in Namibia is the cross-border pollination of skill to see that the coasts become alive. Thank you.
Would anyone from the panel like to maybe...
I would love to answer that question. Thank you very much. Yes. What a great question, and I think spot on in terms of really where the challenges lie, because there's a technical challenge in all this. You know, producing green hydrogen at scale, at a rate that is marketable and that can grow that economy. And in the short term, there's a lot of money going in to support that process. Marco was telling me about some of the subsidies that are available that are really driving early leaders or into the space. But what is sometimes forgotten is exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about, which is how do we gear our training and economy to build the skills and the pipeline that can feed that. And that often becomes then a bottleneck at some point. But I think your TVEC college example is an excellent one. We have the infrastructure and we have this network right up the West Coast. I mean, Saldanha's got it, Atlantis has it, and I'm sure in the Northern Cape there's plenty as well. So there is a great opportunity, and I can just say at the moment Atlantis has got a great partnership going with GIZ and NBI with the TVET College to actually look at building skills around green construction and then providing internships as well in the context of that. And I think there's some models out there around partnerships and how we can build and extend those. And I think if we just take the TVET colleges, as it's a great place to start with exactly that process. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think you've highlighted a great opportunity in the context of this year.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Any other comments? Yes, thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Magnell, WK and Windcurrent. We're a renewable energy developer. I think my question follows on a little bit from Martin's here around the SEZs and how they can work together going forward, but then putting it towards the ports, the current port and the future ports, both in South Africa and then in Namibia too, how do you see that all working together between one that exists and needs some upgrades to one that still needs to be built, and I think you said 2028 is the date. Hopefully it's operational, and then Namibia going ahead, I think your date's 2026 if I remember. So how does that all dovetail together and complement each other versus not working together as efficiently?
Please.
I'll take a stab at that. It's down to trust and coherence, because we need to be able to be clear on what Boegoebergsberg requires and their timelines. And then how Saldanha can play a complementary role. So just I'm more of a pragmatic person, and I think of things as how do you gonna build it. So Saldanha is the closest port to Boegoebergsberg. So I would see as a logical example of how it's going to work is that it would be probably the recipient of early project mobilization. So any of the equipment, any of the assets that need to be installed in Boegoebergsberg can come on road from all over, but Saldanha is actually, we've already handled long wind blades for IPP projects up the West Coast, the Western Cape and the Northern Cape. So it already has that experience of handling project cargo. So we can do that for Boegoebergsberg. The news. And then on using I want to say, like you said, to phrase it that way, the retrofitting of Saldanha on a new green hydrogen journey, the lessons that we can learn of supporting first mover pilot projects, that is another example of cooperation. So, you know, all of the ins and outs of actually how do you get a project to work. We can translate that and share that with Boegoeberg. And then also from their side, because of the scale that they want to do. The other thing I think is another area is let's work together on standardization and certification of what is a green molecule and how do you actually then provide the grid capacity and the grid network in order to support that. And I think that maybe we can certainly, you know, learn from that. So I think that there are lots of practical examples of how we can actually learn from each other to make sure that we address the challenge of limited infrastructure and the premium that you pay on green hydrogen. Yeah.
I'm going to take
Can I just jump in halfway through? So, looking at Namibia, I think one of the challenges in South Africa is different segments of the supply chain that all need to integrate and effectively project-on-project risk, because you need all of those projects to reach financial close and be executed in parallel. And a failure of one of those elements in the supply chain to deliver has an enormous impact, and there's liquidated damages and people go out of business. I think one of the advantages that we have in Namibia is our project is vertically integrated. So effectively, we will build out wind, solar, electrolyzer, water pipelines, gas pipelines, ammonia synthesis loop, and the first phase of the port master plan for the export of product as one integrated project. But even though it is an integrated project, a large amount of that infrastructure is common use infrastructure that has been over-dimensioned in order to support the execution of subsequent projects, building towards the south of our site, ultimately all the way through to the border of South Africa, and then hopefully connecting all the way through. That is the idea, and effectively that integration enables enormous scale, because if you've built an initial pipeline that's connected to a port, and to add on additional solar, wind, and electrolyzer and connect into that infrastructure is massively less risky than the first project and can be executed very, very quickly. Gas pipelines can move an enormous amount of energy. So for us, that's the most logical way to move that energy. That's in terms of the long term. And in the terms of the short term, Project Cargo, we're certainly looking to our colleagues both on my left and my right to support the movement to Project Cargo, because it is an enormous number of abnormal loads.
Thank you. Just tipping on that is I think there's a niche in every one of those ports, and those ports has also got time niches, and the time niches, as mentioned by Kashifa, will initiate. Just to our colleagues north of the border, you can see the sheer size. Give me a quick idea. The volume that we are looking at is 450,000 hectares to be placed under wind and solar. So initiating phase 2028 through our partnership with Sasol, we'll be moving towards 600 megawatt electrolyzer capacity, 2030, 1,2 gig. So those are what we're sure that we'll be able to handle in a partnership with Saldanha, definitely. Saldanha has proven it, our road infrastructure adapted for that. By that time, we will have a dedicated port that will be able to facilitate the fast-track ramp-up of what we have to move in then. Because beyond 2030, we'll be staggering at rapid succession to modularly expand our capacity. And ultimately what that will do is then, we just had a meeting now with James and them, we will also then be in a position with Boegoeberg with its custom solution then to complement what's happening in Namibia. Human capital is pertinent, like Martin asked about, and that will put us in a position to start with a molecule economy. And the benefit from that is with the pipeline distribution, that molecule can go down to a PTX solution then, for instance, in Saldanha, that's got a carbon solution at that. And then we can also stabilize the export orientation. Our niche is not just export orientation. There's going to be a global market equilibrium to be reached. And subsequently, we must jet South Africa. And that is when we start looking inland. Just also notable is that we will not just convert the Western SAGHS corridor at that. Remember, we've got 240,000 souls captured within the fossil fuels. And by 2050, when we move towards zero emission rate, those souls need to be released and transitioned to a green pipeline as well. And that is the important criteria that we'll be looking at. And each of these sectors will play a critical role. And pivotal will be volume, size, scalability, and timelines, and then complementing one another going into specialization. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mike, for that question. I think it's quite an interesting one. And maybe just 2 points additional to what the colleagues here have indicated. I think firstly, from a new port perspective, especially in Boegoeberg location, there's going to be a huge demand for skills, resources, etc. in the development phase for the renewable energy sector, for the SEZ, as well as the port. Collaboration is going to be the key. How do we develop the capacity for development that will come through over the next 5-year period? So partnerships is absolutely critical. Just to give you an example of some of the areas where we need to collaborate much more closely, and we're doing that with the provincial government, particularly on the bulk services, things like energy, desalinated water. Does the port provide its own standalone system? Do we link up with the larger SEZ developments from a scale perspective? So those types of collaborations and decision makings are actually quite key. And then your point around perhaps existing ports. I think the hydrogen economy is certainly not limited to just one part of South Africa. It could be spread around the country. There's certainly a lot of engagements taking place between Transnet National Ports Authority and the IDZs in the back of port area to see where there are opportunities for bespoke solutions, especially where there may be spare capacity within the port or additional capacity may be required, all within the legal frameworks, of course. So those things are underway as well.
Thanks, Max. One opportunity, last opportunity for a question. Yes, sir. You, sir.
Okay. It's a kind of linked to these discussions that we're having now about infrastructure connections and scalability, etc., and also linked to the the renewable energy development zones, related to what the country needs to grapple with already, which is energy security, versus the nice to have green hydrogen scenario, and the amount of land that's available to do all of this, and also the public response to what we all know about, but I don't think there's many other people outside of this summit that knows all about this wonderful opportunity in green hydrogen. So the question is, are there any other alternative energy sources aside from wind and solar, which appears to be the main energy source you guys are looking at?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hendrik, I'm going to walk directly to you.
Thank you very much. I think ultimately it's a entrenched debate in terms of electron. The solution for South Africa and the globe in terms of a JETP process is not just the electron debate. That's the fuel cell debate. Can we transfer everything to electric operated? We know that heavy hauling electricity transport modes is just not efficient at this stage due to battery technology, etc. Hydrogen is not a luxury. Hydrogen is a must, because mobility and logistics is a must, but we cannot put that to electron. So I think first I just need to set that aside. Yes, on African continent, 650 million households is out there. Why would we take the luxury of renewable energy, push it into the grid towards the electrolyzer? That's not the argument. The argument is that of additionality, which is pertinent. And that additionality is new renewable energy projects to create a fuel source that will complement the energy mix for the global arena that can be applied then to industry, that can be specifically applied. And hydrogen's got a very specific application, and this is in the JETP, in the PTX solution process. Your synthetic fuel solutions is for mobility quite pertinent, and it's an important transitionary fuel for now in the era to lead. So it will remain out there. Certification is quite pertinent. In this essence is that for certification purposes, the essence is that of renewability. So even your water source, even your environmental footprint, and then ultimately your energy source must be of a renewable resource. Wave energy, hydro energy, those are other solutions that is renewable. Can we use other energy sources at this stage? If they're not renewable, no. Pity is we can't use nuclear. There's just no way, because it's not a renewable energy source. LNG, it's an old debate, and the EU is out there. Because the reason for the price tag on green hydrogen is and then also green product, green steel, green glass, is the fact that it's certified as green origin. So for time being, wind and solar, in terms of capital layout, in terms of capital efficiency and ratio to be put into the process, is most probably, as we know it now with technology, the most efficient. There is a hydrogen plant now currently that we do know that is currently out in Angola. That is redundant resource in terms of energy at a dam, which is hydro-driven. That's a solution that worked for them because they had 1 gig capacity. Prof. Libin from the African Verein Group, they're busy with that one. So that one can work. So those are the other sources. But in essence, must be renewable energy source. Otherwise, we don't have certified green product. As it stands now, I think hydro we can possibly explore, but it's expensive in terms of capital if we do it specialized, if it's not in addition to. Wave energy is out there as well, but we haven't explored the cost unit, because remember, 60% of your input cost is energy. So if that capital cost is geared too high, your project and your product will then be not market efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your questions. Please engage the panel members further. You are all invited to the networking event, drinks and snacks across the road at the square. I've been asked to remind you, please, there's a tent, go and chat further there. So I would like to close the panel by asking each of you to please give one closing remark on, for me, I think we are a group of dreamers. I think this is such an exciting time to be in the energy sector. For me, it feels like 25 years ago when we were talking about renewable energy and everybody said, it will never happen, it's too expensive. So some words of inspiration to us dreamers. Where do you see this going, and what are we going to talk about next year at the next summit? Sorry, Hendrik, I'm going to skip you. I'm going to start with Kishan. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know if this is on. Yeah, for me, I think the main thing is the execution of projects. So projects, and next year hopefully we can talk about all the projects that's been executed over the year.
So maybe to link up with that, I think for us as Transnet, we put our heads down in the coming weeks as we evaluate the RFQ. And at the end of the day, we identify what would be the port location. And I think many people have their fingers crossed. And the next time we're sitting here, we'll be telling you where the port is going to be built and the timelines of how that's going to be implemented. Thanks.
So I see hydrogen as the unifier amongst the regions. Our economies are absolutely intertwined. I think Namibia, for example, is in our top 3 exports from the Western Cape, but we never sort of visit each other. And so our economies are absolutely intertwined, but we keep going to international markets, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, next year, we're going to stand here and say, hydrogen has united our regions in a common vision. Thanks.
I think that this is a new journey for all of us, and we need to turn the challenge inside out, upside down, to find innovative alliances. That for me is critical. I think even though I've mentioned some of the project developers, they themselves are looking for strategic partners. So, looking at Cecil. And yeah, because I think that's I know Hyphen is going all, like as you said, like fully integrated. But even so, we need to have a new mindset behind forging these alliances. Thanks.
I think investment certainty is required in order to enable the mobilization of capital. Nobody's really spoken about it on the panel around the quantum of capital that needs to be crowded in, and the price. The production price curve for hydrogen is flat. It's not like oil, where Saudi Arabia's got a 10x advantage. South Africa's advantage over another geography in the world is maybe 1.5. It's not infinite. So the cost of capital, it's very boring, but it is an incredible driver of the levelized cost of hydrogen. So investment policy, investment security, SEZ framework certainty, that is absolutely critical to drive investment, to crowd that amount of capital into a country. This could be the largest foreign direct investment into the history of the African continent, into South Africa and Namibia. That's what this means, but you do not get that level of capital without providing an enormous amount of investor security. And if you want to get regional integration and be able to use energy between the countries, crowd in the capital.
Yeah, I just want to say ditto, I think, because there's that great saying about, reach for the stars, but keep your feet on the ground. And I think always the difficulty in a situation like this, when one is aspirational and very motivated, is to take the first step. And I think in this context of where we are, the clear signals that come from government, and particularly those partners, the DTIC, Transnet, and backed by Treasury, so there's a clear, aligned signal that is consistent and clear in terms of what they will support, will give that confidence, will go a long way to building the confidence to take those first steps. Thanks.
Just very pertinent for me, as in summarizing in all of this, is it's coming to projects that's tangible, kick, touch, and feel. Now, if we see what happened at COP27, they shared with us that 1,200 MOAs towards green hydrogen production has been signed September 2022, up to September 22. 4% of them in pre-feasibility and feasibility. Next year, if we sit here, I think we must then say to the global world that 4% in South African context has transitioned to touch, kick, and feel, and those projects are working, and we're producing mobility and green hydrogen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please join the drink ceremony. Panelists, please don't run away. I have a small gift for you. And thank you so much for your insights and your valuable contributions. Thanks.